Raya's life was like a spectacular thing, and it took on this kind of mythic proportion. The greatest king of South India, the one who fought against all the invaders, etc., etc., etc. But the fascinating thing was, he's a real man. He's a real human being. A historical figure that we know about. So Vijayanagara is a place, in terms of trading of that time. They'd always say, those famous stories of, there were diamonds everywhere. So you have the mines of Golconda. So in baskets, they would be trading, rubies and diamonds, like that kind of thing. What you really found in this period was a kind of renaissance of classical, culture in India, I feel.
This is the World Affair. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe.
Hello friends, Namaste. I Mithilesh and Sumit welcome you to a new episode of the History Report. Today we have with us noted scholar, translator and musician Sri Srinivas Reddy. Welcome Srinivas.
Thank you very much.
In 1509, Krishnadevaraya, a prince from humble origin, ascended the throne of Vijaynagara. The empire he inherited was weak from two messy dynastic successions, and ambitious enemy king loomed large on all sides. A haughty king of Orissa in the east, five upstart Deccan Sultans to the north, revolting Tamil Rajas in the south, and enterprising Portuguese soldiers from the west. But Krishnadevaraya quickly rose to the challenge, and in the course of his remarkable 20-year reign, he changed history forever. He won every single battle he fought and unified the whole of South India under his banner. Today, we'll discuss the exemplary life of Krishnadevaraya through his epic biography, Raya Krishnadevaraya of Vijayanagara, written by Srinivas Reddy. Our guest studied South Asian languages and literature at University of California, Berkeley, and currently teaches at Brown University and IIT Gandhinagar. Srinivas is a concert guitarist and spends his time performing, teaching, and conducting research around the world. His previous books include translations of Krishnadevaraya's Amukmalayada and Kalidasa's Meghdutam and Malvika Agnimitram. So, Srinivas, what led you to write Raya?
Thank you very much for that big introduction and inviting me to speak. Raya, the biography that we're discussing now is really an outgrowth of my thesis work. So what I worked on for my PhD, which was that Amuktamayada, which you had mentioned, which was a poem that the king himself wrote. So my, my studies mostly come from literature background. So reading all the classical text, and that's how I arrived here, because it was a great text of classical Telugu. And then I found out it was written by a king, then it was exciting. And so in my thesis work, there was all of this historical material that was never published, that this was the perfect opportunity to do that. So that's how it came.
You have vividly depicted the life and time of Krishnadevaraya in your book. For our viewers, please tell us who Krishnadevaraya was and why should one read his biography?
To answer the first question, I would say read the biography. But you asked a good second up follow-up. Why should you read the biography? Well, if you want to know someone, you should read a good biography. Why someone would maybe want to write a biography is also a question I ask myself, in a sense. Well, one thing is that we all like, people love to hear life history. To hear life history is every human being loves that, because you always want to find yourself in the story of another human being. And every human being is facing, many different types of challenges, and everyone has different circumstances, but some fundamental things are same. Every human being has to deal with eating, You know, every human being has to deal with relationships of some kind or another, family of some kind or another, and then you have to deal with death. So now, why Raya? Why Krishnadevaraya? Because he's just this iconic figure. So one thing is that there's all this mythology, especially in South India. I mean, Krishnadevaraya is not so well known in North India. I don't know if you guys, grew up hearing all those stories about Tenaliraman and all this stuff when you were kids, or maybe you heard more like Akbar Birbal types. I don't know. Everyone deals with these fundamental issues, but Raya's life was like a spectacular thing, and it took on this kind of mythic proportion. The greatest king of South India, the one who fought against all the invaders, etc., etc., etc. But the fascinating thing was, he's a real man. He's a real human being. A historical figure that we know about. So, that's one part of it. The other part is, anytime we're looking at history, and in particular biography, like I'm saying, because we see ourselves in these people, is that we also see ourselves in particular time situations, in the sense that what situation he was dealing with in 1500 with all these people you mentioned, Portuguese, Gajapati, the Sultans and the Tamil Raj, all this stuff going on, different kinds of things. They're basically the most, parallel types of problems going on, same right now. Issues of identity, issues of community, issues of trade, issues of money, So when we look at history, when we look at life histories of the past, what we're really looking at is, how can I get examples to deal with the present problems that I'm having as a human being? That didn't answer the question exactly, because then, why Raya? Oh, Raya was at this special time. And, it's fun to know about great, we get inspired by these people who did fantastic things. So, in that sense, it's always good to be inspired by, good ideals and the kinds of values that he tried to embody, and I think as a leader. And, that was what I was writing in the book too. This is a time when we need, stories of good leadership, of like, greatness, of strength, of all of the stuff, of tolerance, compassion, all these are all the traits of great leaders that we can learn from. So that's why someone should read, Raya. Also, as an Indian, everybody should just know Indian history, period, full stop.
Yeah, so I would just like to show for my audience the beautiful cover and the book. Yeah, so I just got this book 2 months back, and yeah, I was mesmerized. And the way like the story ended, I was feeling as if I was reading this my favorite superhero novel, and the way the book ended, I felt sad for 2 days. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't feel that I was reading a historical biography. As if I was reading a superhero novel. All the characteristic and all the materials and climax was there inside a single character. That's hard to find in Indian history or in old history per se.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I was. He's just a special character. I mean, like, what a life, And then, like, as much as I tried to mention the different kind of mythologies, I really did want to write down as much, really hard empirical historical fact as we could. He's a larger than life character of history. Let us put it that way.
In Raya, we see a young Krishnadevaraya start his expansion campaign as soon as he was anointed the lion's throne and keeps on engaging in the war until he retires. Was this common for rulers of that time, or was it a special trait of Krishnadevaraya?
Excellent question. It was most definitely the state of affairs at the time. I mean, disputes between land and dominance in that Deccan region during that time was very fluid. You know what I mean? Like, take for example the big battle that you read about, Raichur. That Raichur part, so it's like Krishna and Tungabhadra. So Tungabhadra is a side branch of the Krishna. So then Vijayanagara claims that everything south of the Krishna is ours. But if the northern fellows see that the Tungabhadra is the Krishna there, then that middle area, both people have a certain kind of claim to it. So, for example, like that Raichur, back and forth, back and forth. One time in Bijapur, one time in Vijaynagara, back to Bijapur, back to Vijayanagara, like this. Same thing with the Gajapatis. The Gajapatis was controlling most of what we would call like coastal Andhra at that time, which was most definitely, all of that southern stuff south of the Krishna, So back and forth, it was always going, this way and that way. And so fighting and being on the, military campaigns was just a part of regular life for any ruler of that time, period. It was the way of life that they had. He was amazing because he just never really lost very many. And I can't find a single battle that he lost, basically, which is amazing. And he did, you have to realize also that there were long campaigns, and then there was also times when we don't have much information, and probably he was sitting at court, because we have to imagine that he also did stay in Vijayanagara sometimes.
You mentioned that in the Battle of Raichur, matchlocks had a significant impact. It is rather surprising that in the first Battle of Panipat, that happened just 6 years after the Battle of Raichur, Ibrahim Lodi didn't use any matchlocks. I might be wrong, but that's what my understanding is. Why didn't the use of matchlocks become more widespread?
You're right that they say that the matchlock uses was the first time was there, and then in Panipat, I don't know if they had or didn't have, but let's assume they didn't, like you're guessing, which I think you might be right. That would be my guess too, because the reason why these guys had those kinds of firearms so early is vis-a-vis the Portuguese and the station in Goa where they were making this stuff. So it was a very interesting kind of moment of technology coming together from, and I think some other technology was from Germany. I forget. I think I might have written it in the book. Eaton's article mentions it if you want to learn more about that. So what I'm saying is it's coming vis-a-vis the Portuguese, not in the northern side, route. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yep.
So that technology must have come in later in the north, is my guess. Or it maybe moved up, if they were bringing in by ship, they were, maybe into Surat or something like that eventually. I don't know.
Yes, in the Battle of Raichur, the Portuguese musketeers supported and helped Raya to take Raichur. How did that event change warfare in India?
Well, like you said, it marks this moment where these new firearm technology appeared, but it also marks a point where, okay, you have this new colonial powers. This is, this is way before the British get involved in India. You know what I mean? Way before. This is right at the beginning. Like 1498, Vasco's there, and within what we're talking like in 15 years, Raya is doing all this stuff. Or no, maybe a little later. Raichur was later, but anyway, soon after, 30 years, let's say maximum. The Portuguese. This is also the first instance where you have basically these guys are working as mercenaries. These guys are not like direct employees of like the empire or something. These guys are merchants. These guys are merchants looking for horse trading deals, and they know Vijayanagara is there. So they're trying to make a business deal basically. And, that was the real rationale behind why the Portuguese wanted to help Vijayanagara. By doing so, and then Raya kind of also being quite happy with these fellows and being very nice, he invites them back to Vijayanagara city, all that stuff. So, by doing that, he's getting some exclusive trading rights with these horse merchants. And that really was the key thing. So, what it does in terms of the dynamics of the Deccan is that, now these guys are going to get more horses. And if you have more horses, you can, basically be more victorious in battle. It was the key thing that they wanted. So that's how I would say, at least from this side of the story, how it would be like a very pivotal moment.
Tell us something about the relationship of Krishnadevaraya with Gajapati King Prataprudradeva. Why did he become his arch nemesis?
So this is, I probably highlighted this feature because it makes for a good storytelling. But even in the way that he's depicted in some of the, like let's say Telugu movies or the traditional accounts of Raya that are told amongst people, the idea was that, Gajapati was the one enemy he hated more than anybody else. Yeah, because Gajapati used to yell and tease that Raya was a Dasi-Putra, because Raya is not from a Kshatriya background. The funny thing is, I don't think Gajapati is either, but still, the idea is that Gajapati is saying that you're the son of a slave or a servant woman, you're a low caste, all this kind of stuff. So Raya didn't like that. Raya was, well educated and quite, sophisticated in his own way. So playing that up was one idea, because the point is that both of them, they're both Hindu kings. They both want to live up to what it means to be a great Hindu king. So like that, they were both kind of literary. They were both maybe culturally aware, all of these kinds of things. But Raya was the one who was really like innovative and amazing. Like the stuff that, even from a literary example, let's say, the stuff that Prataprudradeva was doing is very kind of simple stuff. Whereas Raya is writing a very complex Mahakavya, it's on a different level. So they were always rivaling each other in all of these different ways, as who could be the greatest king. And the fact that the Gajapatis now owned a lot of land that was traditionally Vijayanagara was a serious, thing that he wanted to rectify.
Essentially, he was into Telugu heartland, and being a Telugu king, he wanted to reclaim. That could be another reason.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, anything south of Krishna, was Vijayanagara in their mind. That was the kind of the traditional boundary. So,
right.
And in fact, after, just as a point on that, even after the whole Gajapati campaign, when Raya, retakes all of that south land and much farther, maybe even went to the capital Cuttack, we don't know, but let us say completely defeated Prataprudra. Yeah. He gave back all the land north of the Krishna.
Right.
Yeah. And then he also married his daughter, but that's a different story.
Sriman Maharaja Dhiraja, Raja Parameshwara, Sri Krishnaraya Maharaya is inscribed in one of the inscriptions of Tirupati temple. How did the symbiotic relations of temples in the kingdom of Vijayanagara play an important role in its rise?
That's a great question and complicated question. From Raya's perspective, and here we can, in an interesting case of history, get a very personal sense of things, was that he personally was devoted to Venkateshwara. His Kulate Devata was definitely Venkateshwara, Tirupati Venkateshwara. He went there 7 times. We know he gave lots of money, donated things. So of course, he was doing it for political, you could say, purposes, or state purposes in a sense. But you get a sense that he was also just personally a devotee in his own faith. So there's that thing. But really, I mean, sponsorship of temples, it's like one form of like public works. It's one form of like good social governance, because the temple gives employment. The temple has lands for making food. Everybody gets prasada. The temple is the place where, performances happen. People study. All sorts of things are happening in the temple. So the temple was, not just, I go and I have my darshan and I come out kind of thing. It really functioned much more as this, communal space, which of course is going to, inspire people, give people opportunities to, be together. So but the relationship now, the bigger relationship you're talking between religion and politics, church and state, as they say in the Western world, I mean, that's a deep and powerful, nexus of things. And this is a huge theme in so many cultures, and definitely in Indian culture, because this is basically the Brahmin Kshatriya kind of, relationship. How does religious authority, interact with political, and state authority? So without going into a huge discussion on that, let me just say that back to the point of like the great Hindu Raja, or like a epitome of a Rajakavi and all these great kind of ideas. One is the sponsorship of yajnas, doing all the right rituals and pujas, and supporting Brahmins, period. Giving Agrahara land, supporting temples, all of this stuff falls into that category. So it's part of their, kind of state religious duty.
There are many legends of Krishnadevaraya. Tell us one such legend to our audience.
One legend, I did put this in the book, that I like, although historically it doesn't work, but it's a great story. So there's many questions about how Raya actually got to ascend to the throne, because he had a brother, whether or not his brother ascended and then he followed his brother, or whether or not the father actually chose Raya, the younger brother. We don't know. So one story goes that Raya's father was on his deathbed, and he called both his sons, Veera Narasimha, the older son, and Krishnadevaraya, the younger son. And he said, I'm dying now, and the crown kind of must flow to one of you two. But I need to know who can do this, who has like the capacity to be a great king. And to do that, you have to pull off the king's signet ring from my finger. And he gave the finger. And so Veera Narasimha tries. He can't get the ring off the finger. Raya tries. Raya can't get the ring off the finger. But Veera Narasimha tries again. And then the king says, if you can't do it, then neither of you should get the crown. Then Raya takes a dagger and he cuts his own father's finger off. And then he takes the ring off. And he says, here. And instead of looking at him with disgust, the Narasimha, the father, was filled with so much pride that he had like a powerful, and willful son. And then he felt happy and died.
You mentioned in the book, Krishnadevaraya made Venkateswara his patron deity and visited Tirupati 7 times. This is in contrast to most of the earlier Vijayanagara kings who favored Shiva in the form of Virupaksha. Do we know what led to this shift?
So this is another big idea of like, when we think of like sectarianism, anywhere, but let us say in our context here of Hinduism, typically, there's the Vaishnava group, and of course within the Vaishnavas there's lots of subgroups. Then you have the Shaivas, right? Then you have Shakta cults and this kind of thing. So all of that is there. But if you look at the history of Vijayanagara, there is a very kind of Ubhaya Vedanta, like they say, like both of the ways are known and followed. So Shaiva, Vaishnava, same. You know what I mean? Like same in the sense that they had no problem. I mean, Raya sponsored the Virupaksha temple too. They knew that this Pampa Devi, and Pampa Devi herself, in the sense she's Shaiva, but she's the stratum that's below all of that in these Shaiva Vaishnava things. This is like the worship of nature that we had in India from a long time back. Pampa Devi is Pampa Nadi, the river. So this is Pampa Kshetra. This land was, worshipped long back, so as a sacred place. Anyway, then the Shaiva layering comes on top of that. Okay, then you might have the Vijayanagara sponsoring the Shaiva temple, might even have a legend about Pampa being the kind of deity of that place. But then Vaishnavism comes in, no problem. There was a heavy period of Vaishnava following at Vijayanagara. We were just actually discussing this with another fellow. And then within Vaishnavism, there's some disagreements. Like, I'm pretty convinced that Raya was a Sri Vaishnava. That's like a follower of Ramanuja and all that. On the Alwars, like that's why, Amuktamal is about Andal. But, his teacher, as we learn, he's Madhva. He's a Dvaita. He's the dualist school, Madhvacharya. So who knows? It's very difficult to say. What I'm really getting at, my point that I'm making is the idea that someone who has a name Krishna doesn't, believe in Shiva or something, as a Hindu, that doesn't make sense. I mean, there are people that are gonna be very strict like that, but for the most part, like myself, let us say, I have no problem going to Kedarnath or Vaishnava Devi, same thing.
Right.
But you know what I mean? So all same.
Yeah, both are Sakti Upasak and Sakti.
Yeah.
Yes.
Krishnadevaraya, being a Dasi-Putra, achieved unparalleled greatness. In fact, many Shudra Indian kings, from Chandragupta Maurya to Suhaildev to Shivaji, had achieved similar greatness. Still, we have been taught in our history books that power was centered among Savarnas. Why is true?
Well, I mean, it is true that if you looked at the percentages of those kinds of historical figures, then most Rajas will, of course, be of some kind of Kshatriya lineage, or that lineage will be made up into Kshatriya, like Raya. I mean, the whole making all of these guys into Chandravamsha people. I mean, these are all made up things. You know what I mean? It's a grafting of yourself into some other lineage. So what I'm saying though is, yes, it's true, but even some of those that might claim that they are from Kshatriya backgrounds are not. I mean, what they're stories that people also create, genealogies, to legitimize their rule. So that's one thing. But let's say even with those ones, still a majority are for that. Now, why, like, is your question, why do you have Shivajis? Why do you have Chandragupta? Well, at some level, you have to see that, we see a lot of great people like this, not just kings, that these people, they have something to prove.
Right.
This man, is tired of the way that the power structure has been, and they want to, exert themselves. So they have that in them to do it, and they did.
What was the reason and source of economic prosperity of Vijayanagara Empire, especially during the time of Krishnadevaraya? If we compare with the northern part of India, they were pretty rich, richer than rest of the world. What was their economic secret?
Economics is one subject I'm weak on. So I Vijayanagara definitely was very rich. A lot of people say it came from, they always say, like, this is Burton Stein, I think, his favorite, the Kaveri milk cow. I mean, that Kaveri basin, gave so much fertile land. And even in the Andhra Delta, so much fertile land. I mean, you had massive, good production of, fruits, grains, everything. And that led to all sorts of kinds of benefits. And then Vijayanagara as a place, in terms of trading of that time, they'd always say, those famous stories of, there were diamonds everywhere, so you have the mines of Golconda. So in baskets, they would be trading, rubies and diamonds, like that kind of thing, right? So a lot of, basically, trade is the fundamental thing that it's coming to.
Yeah.
And that trade also extended, like I was saying, to these international trade things. And the other, I mean, India, the other thing we always have to realize is India is a land. I'm not even talking about empire, just because what I'm talking about is basically in the land, like these mines, these diamonds, they're just there. It's like that means what is the richness of India as a land, like Bhudevi, what that land gave us. That's what everyone came, taking and taking and taking, gone, taking all. All these colonial were taking nothing but taking gold and riches away, but we had so much of that. We're so rich.
Coming to the art and culture during the time of Krishnadevaraya and Vijayanagara in general, Krishnadevaraya himself composed many prose and poetry. He promoted other poets, musicians. He was also a Veena Vadak. Tell us something about that. How it happened, what impact it had on current India.
Well, this was an exciting moment for, I think, at least from an Indian literary perspective, let's say. And then again, I was discussing with this very nice person who had written to me, Carnatic music, what was going on at that time. I didn't get to write all about that in the book, but this the nonet of, or I think nine fellow Navaratna of that court of musicologists. So the reformulation of all sorts of music. What you really found in this period was a kind of renaissance of classical, culture in India, I feel. Because what happened was, let's say at least in the South, you have from 1000 onwards, you had, the kind of flowering and beginnings of regional Telugu literature, Kannada literature, that kind of stuff. And that, blooms. And then by 1500, that really reaches a type of apex. And what these guys are now doing is looking back at old things like the Vedas, like the Natya Shastra, like the Sangeeta Ratnakara, all these different, all different kinds of shastras, different kinds of sciences, and revising them for this new age, 1500, not 500 or whatever when they were written. So like that, there was basically like this beautiful like flowering of knowledge happening at that time. What's sad though is that colonialism is what retards that whole process, so that it's basically dead now. We don't have that classical tradition anymore.
This is the world affair. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
One more question. From the north of Vijayanagara, that is five upstart sultans, Krishnadevaraya had some quid and pro relationship with them, especially Bijapur, that is basically Vijayanagara. They had family ties, marriages, and all. Tell us something about that relation.
Well, you said it exactly, and maybe to set it up, the very classic. If you read all the old history books, and even today, people really believe that the Vijayanagara was like the one thing that stopped Islam from going everywhere in India, and the sultans were coming to convert everybody. But that's not really what was going on. Islam was spreading, no doubt about it. They were fighting, and people were fighting in the north, and then these Bahmani guys, they're all like the successors of the Tughlaqs. So they're coming down here to find a nice place to settle down, and they're fighting amongst each other, and they break up. But the one that was most always at odds with Vijayanagara, let's say, was Bijapur. Yes, you're right. And like you said, to think that these two groups, the sultans in the north and the rajas in the south, like they don't have any connection. No, they were, like you said, having marriage alliances. They were teaming up sometimes against other ones of those Bahmani sultans. So like that, it went back and forth. And it just so happened that finally one day, because actually Raya was getting, or Vijayanagara, not Raya, this is after Raya, Vijayanagara was getting so rich that at one point, the sultans, all five of those guys said, hey, this Vijayanagara guy is getting too much. Let's take him out, man. So again, and I got a lot of criticism about this from people. I'm not saying that religion wasn't important. I'm not saying that people weren't, having problems like that. All I'm saying is that religion wasn't the main reason. I'm not saying it was one of the factors, but it wasn't the main reason that people were doing these things. It's politics and power that drives things. You know what I mean? One day this guy's your friend, then next day he's your enemy. Doesn't matter. It's like today. You know what I mean? It's the same thing today. Same thing today.
Yeah, it's all about power.
Yeah.
And then economic money, or whatever you say.
That's it. And that's my big argument. No, the reason why all the Bahmanis ganged up on Vijayanagara got too rich. They had all the horses, they had all this money. They really didn't like that.
Mentioned in the book that Vijayanagara had really strong ties to the Portuguese. You mentioned how they used to import horses and how Portuguese had a monopoly on the sea routes. What transpired? What went from Vijayanagara to the other part of the world because of their connection with Portuguese and Goa?
Yeah, look, this is a great question. And again, this is like my weak area. I don't know all this economic commerce stuff, but definitely gold went, and textiles went. Their main currency that they all decided to go on were actually Vijayanagara, those pardal. That's what they called them, the Portuguese guys. And they had a mint there in Goa. They were making the gold coins. So the horses, yeah. And he says it in the poems. He talks about that, like what are the kinds of things that these guys are going to have. So perfumes, all the kinds of silks, fabrics, all this kind of stuff. But details, I have to look into more. I don't know what the main I think those are the main things. Spices, that kind of stuff. I can't think of anything else that was really, exciting for those guys. Can you?
I think I read it somewhere. I think in Richard M. Eaton's book, India in the Persianate Age, he talks about how Portuguese and others and British also, they all concentrated on the coastal areas because of cotton farming and the textile manufacturing industries. Also, I mean, if you look at the book by Robert Swell, he gives a very binary world at that point of time. He talks about how all the Muslim kings ganging up and attacking Hindu Rajas, and the Hindus had all gotten together under one umbrella called Vijayanagara Empire. Right? Yeah. And you talk about how the modern historians are changing the narrative. So what do you think by how much it has changed in the last 100 or so years, and where is the research going on the topic of Deccan Sultans and the kingdoms at that point of time?
Huh. Well, we're in an interesting. I mean, I think the case has been made thoroughly enough by these scholars, Eaton, Wagner. In Manu Pillai's book, I think he makes this point throughout the book, and I try to make that point. But I do offer some critique of them also, because, like I was saying, I don't want to throw religion out of it. Let's not forget people did have feelings about, this is not, a group that I know about, that kind of thing. It's not like people don't have those feelings. So it's like I want to have a more middle kind of approach. They of course they're reacting to this history. So when you react, you have to kind of make a strong point. Then you kind of rebalance somewhere in the middle and understand that this is what's going on. The problem, though, I mean, the real issue at hand is no matter what these guys say, those guys don't listen, and whatever those guys say, these guys won't listen. So you're always trying to convince this fellow who will never listen, and then all you end up doing is talking to the same people that believe the same. Oh, excellent, yes. So that, you know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what the future doesn't look. I mean, I don't know what the next thing to think about is. The next thing to think about is more people should work on these things in more different areas of Indian history. So it's just not a few people talking about it. And Indians doing it too is really important. Not everything be said by Western scholars. That's not good either.
Right.
How many people, or how important it is for a department to research about Indian history? I mean, what happens is that there must be a dominant field of research among historians. So where does it lie, researching about Indian history? Is it very prominent? Not so much. I mean, where I'm coming from is that probably in the Western universities, the research is tilted more towards researching about European or American history. Indian scholars are probably more tilted about researching. What I mean is that Indian scholars are probably tilted more towards researching about India. We know that Indian schools are probably not that global when it comes to research output. So in terms of prestige of doing research on Indian history, where does it stand in the hierarchy?
Let's just look at Indian history now, and this gets into some deeper questions about how history is written. But at least history, as we're talking about, right, writing books like this, or like Eaton and all of those guys, like those books, those histories are mostly being written, at least when it comes to now. See, there's a shift because those are more popular. But let's say the more academic ones. Most of those books are written by Westerners in the West. So, I mean, but that just goes to, but it's not like every school has South Asian studies or something like that. But the schools that do, and there's a good number of schools that do, people do really good work. Now, we don't have that kind of rigorous scholarship at that level in India. We just don't, period. If we, again, this is so many issues I have to talk about to discuss this. One is our old way of knowledge our old masters, or old true scholars, pundits, true pundits, I'm saying, they're dead, and their livelihood, their way of living is dead, and we didn't support them, so that's fine. I mean, colonialism really changed all of that, but that's fine. But even now, we look at Indian schools, I mean, go to IIT or do something, go to civil service, or that's, forget it. No one tells you to become a history professor. Nobody tells you to become an artist. Nobody tells you, no, it's fine. I mean, that's our Indian way. We're hurting ourselves with our own education, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what kind of support do you see from the government? I mean, is the government becoming more supportive or doing research about India? Is there more support today, for instance, let's say, compared to, say, 20 years ago? Or has it been very stagnant?
In India, or
in India by the government?
Indian government, I mean, again, now things get politicized when you have the government get involved. So again, and this plays a lot into why we're having problems, because we in India are also say, this guy says that way, that guy says this way, this guy's left, this guy's right. Nobody says, I mean, there's nobody in the middle who says, let's just talk about history and have a decent discussion, and we can disagree about certain things. So I don't know if Indian history has gotten more or less right now, because what I'm saying is the government it's not about the government exactly. It's more about the culture that we're, as our own people, that we support and believe in. So that is the thing that's at hand,
Adding to that, Krishnadevaraya, with such an illustrious period who united entire southern India, has little mention in our history books. Our government has constituted a parliamentary standing committee on education to rewrite our history books. What suggestions would you give them?
Well, my biggest suggestions would be that we have a comprehensive coverage of basic important facts and themes for all of Indian history. Like the other day, I read an article that there's one group that wants to not discuss Akbar in the history textbook. I mean, like, how do you not discuss Akbar? I mean, that means that you are not discussing Indian history, man. Like him, love him, hate him, whatever you want. What the history hai? So bus. I mean, like, we're still fighting at that level, man. Such a petty level, So yeah, things like Krishnadevaraya should be included more. The bottom line, let me put it even more simply and more importantly like this. We Indians need to know each other better. North Indians should spend time visiting South Indian. They should have programs like that. More students should go. South Indians should go and visit in North India. East Indian should go to the Northeast sometime. Like that. I mean, we need to know ourselves, because we don't know ourselves, that all these fellows are sitting here writing about us and telling us about our own history still. When are we going to say, boss, I'm going to write my own history book, and I'm going to do it because I did my research and I studied, but not because I made it up or I think I come from a great civilization, which it is. So it's not that I don't believe that, but I did research and I'm telling this. That's what we need at this point.
Moving ahead,
need people like you guys, write books, tell people good things,
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll follow your trends. Coming from science background, Sumit himself came from Berkeley. He was there in Harsh, and I'm coming from a triple IT. I was so our IT and MBA, all those things. We are coming from the science background, and we are determined to change our history, not in that way, but rewrite and research and rehearse.
Yeah. No, but I know. Of course, you came from science background. There's no other background to come from. Can you imagine with the crores of people, like we can't put in some one Olympic athlete. I mean, in any silly sport, we can't even manage that. In history, in anything, like let these. We're not letting our own talent shine in this country. That's the biggest problem.
Yeah.
Not everyone is cut out for IITs and nobody wants that many engineers anyway, man.
Very, education.
It's very crazy. So when we were talking before, the main thing that I would do, if I was the leader, massive education reform. Massive education reform. That would be the number one thing to grow a country. That's what you have to do. Everything starts with children. Everything starts with education. So that's what I would do.
What are the other things you're working on? Are you writing some new books?
Right now, I don't know. I'm kind of not sure what to work on. I'm working on some translations. I want to make an anthology of classical Indian literature, like important Upanishads, Vedas, stuff that, again, when I teach these classes, or even in India when I teach, Upanishads, Vedas, Jainism, Buddhism, all this stuff, so many times, because obviously not everyone in the class is reading Sanskrit or Pali, I have to go to the translations, and most of the time, they're done by a Westerner.
Yes, correct.
And I'm not saying that's bad. It just means that it comes from a perspective, and they're old. Some of the only translations we have, some of this stuff that are decent are, from way back in colonial time. I have to give it, it's like crazy. So updating that is one of the projects I'm working on. Let's see what else. The other big project is it's like in the back of my head, but it's the whole thing about how prana and nada, life, breath, and sound, at least in the musical text, are actually talked about as parallel things. So basically, how sound production and Indian music and the yogic body are related to each other.
Right. Yeah, it's part of 16 kalas of Sri Krishna, the music, dance,
Yeah.
It's a way to attainment of supreme power, or good to God.
Yes.
What?
You have translated books such as Amuk Malyada, Meghdootam, and Malvika Agnimitra. How did that experience help you to write Raya?
Well, the Kalidasa not so much, but the Amuktamaya, though, like I was telling you, was essential, because the main thing I tried to do in Raya, the unique perspective I think that I brought to that study was, incorporating verses from the king's own work,
Right,
and correlating them with historical moments to show that, that the king did write this text because it's matching up, but also to show that poetic material, what we think of as kavya, that we don't think of as history, is just as historically informative as, let's say, a more traditional, history book. You know what I'm saying? So translating, having that Amuktamaya there was essential. And like I was saying, there's a whole 80 verses on Rajaniti that the king wrote inside Amuktamaya. So it's like the king's own maxims and the king's own advice for good leadership.
When it comes to translation, you must have studied older Tamil or Sanskrit texts. What difficulties do you face when doing translation?
So, well, the Amuktamaya though is Telugu, but yeah, I studied Tamil also. My guru was the Tamil master, George Hart. And of course, Sanskrit is essential if you want to study classical Telugu. But what challenges? That was the question. What challenge? A translator has all sorts of challenges, and different challenges exist for different kinds of texts. So, but on a general level, let's say, if you're doing kavya, if you're doing poetry, then you really want to translate as poetry. And that's what a lot of these old colonial translations were not. They sound so boring. They sound so uninspired. There's no feeling to. So what I'm saying is the greatest challenge for a translator of poetry is to know that they have to write poetry in the new language, in the target language. And that's not how those guys thought of it. The greatest person who did that and changed South Asian studies and the study of Indian literature is A.K. Ramanujan. He's the one that made this, really important shift in how Indian literature was translated, poetry in particular.
Coming to Mahamantri Timmarusu, the Prime Minister of Krishnadevaraya, he was a charismatic leader. If we look into ancient Indian history, Chanakya was one such person. Can we compare both?
Yeah, we can compare them just in the sense that they represent a trope, they represent a theme. They represent an idea in Indian consciousness, like the clever minister, you know, and how essential that shrewdness of that minister is to the success of the king. So that's very important. I mean, in a sense, Timarasu is himself feeling himself like a Chanakya. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And you know, when they call it Chanakya Niti, you know, it's like they knew these things, they studied these things, that kind of, you know, like that. I think, and this really relates to Indian history. See, Indian history and even the Indian way of life. You see, Chanakya is not just Chanakya; he is also Timarasu. See, Chanakya is not a historical guy that lived 452 to. He's an idea. He's a concept, right?
Yeah.
He's like a spirit, you know, that kind of stuff. And this gets, you know, played out in many different ways and in many different times.
Yeah.
So for an Indian, you know, it's like he is that Chanakya. That is what he's doing. Even for Timurasu, he's in a way thinking on that Chanakya as he lives his own life. Just like us, like you might, I mean, maybe not in these days, but people, you know, you might think about Rama, you might think about Arjuna, you might think about these, I don't know, how these characters behave, and you might be inspired, oh, that they didn't do that, that wasn't a good idea, or they did do that and it wasn't a good idea. You know, what I'm trying to say is that the consciousness of these characters is 100% real, because they're what is in the mind influencing whoever that historical personage might be. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, look, today Timarasu is saying maybe Amit Shah is thinking Chanakya all the time. We don't know. You know what I mean? So,
Yes. So it has become adage or some big adjective if you put some. Yes. It has become the way of life. Like if any guru want to become a big guru, he so I want to become a Chanakya. I want to.
yeah. So you said it right there. That's the Indian thing. A Chanakya.
Yes.
We don't have the Chanakya. We have a Chanakya. Means Chanakya can go on 100 times. This is the root of Indian consciousness. This is why Western history does not work in Indian context, because Indian history is not linear.
Yep.
Indian history is cyclical. Indian consciousness is cyclical.
Yes.
So Chanakya comes once, he goes away, and comes back again, no problem.
During our childhood, we grew up to listening to stories of Krishnadevaraya and Tenaliraman. Tell us one such story to our audience.
Anytime people ask me about Tenaliraman, I say there's no connection between Tenaliraman and Krishna. But you know, I used to love one story. I used to remember when I was a kid. There was a dancer who came, and this dancer could dance kuchipudi, you know, Kathak, Orissa, all the styles. So the big question was, where is this dancer from? And all the pundits tried to figure it out. Nobody could figure it out. And then Tenali shows up and he says, I'll find out. So she starts dancing, and then he throws a little scorpion onto the dance floor. And the scorpion bites her. And when it bites her, she says, Abba! You know, which is, that's how a Telugu person says, ow. And she says, oh, you're from Andhra, you know, because, you know, when you can put on an accent, you can show how you are. But in moments of like, you know, real pain or real intensity, you go to your mother language. And so that's how I figured it out.
Yeah, lots of stories about Tenali Rama, but as you also mentioned in the book, that probably it's a fictional character. So that's very disappointing to me.
Well, look, two things. One is he's fit into that, again, another trope. The clever minister, Birbal, and there's 100 million stories we make about, you know, Birbal, and 100 million stories about Tenaliraman. There was a Tenaliraman who was a clever poet, though, who was at his court. He just wasn't this, like, gangster clown guy or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, thank you so much.
Yes, on the, yeah, thanks for joining
Thank
and
you.
yeah, your book. Yep, thank you.
Thanks for joining and sharing stories about all the characters and talking about your book. And we wish you best for your future endeavors.
Definitely, like your book is seminal book, and I bet it will be one of the most reference book in coming time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chalo, bye. Bye.
Yeah.
Hopefully you liked this episode. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe.